to everyone here on a Saturday early morning if you're on the West Coast, morning on the East Coast, and an afternoon if you are across the pond. I am Loralee Scott, founder and director of the Sophia Center, and I'm thrilled to be bringing Professor Andrew Samuels back for this second in a series of 4 complimentary Sophia Talks. And this morning we are going to jump right into it and get started with this conversation. So Andrew, coming off of the last session that we had about a month ago where, you made the comment that sometimes you look into the abyss and you wonder if it's all just, in your words, talk, talk, talk. Young wrote, and you agreed, one of the challenges for really intuitive individuals is committing to action as opposed to just creating in their own minds. And in this conversation, we're going to focus on, in your words, the way we do politics and the model you've developed that outlines 4 political styles. So where did you get the idea of political styles from?
Well, I'm going to sing, and I don't know why my face is not on the screen.
You are.
Okay. Well, I'm going to sing. It ain't what you do, it's the way that you do it. It ain't what you say, it's the way that you say it. And that's what gets results. I've been working the politics and psychology field all my life, and it's taken me a long time to realize that the content of what people say, their positions, their ideas, is equally balanced by the way that they say it. So people who have similar points of view find themselves disagreeing because they are saying those points of view very differently. Well, it didn't just come from a musical. It also came from Jung's psychological types, which is about individual variations in personality. And so, in semi-humorous vein, I cooked up a model, and I'm saying there are 4 different styles of being a citizen: heroes, siblings, ostriches, and good enough. Don't choose. You don't need to choose. In fact, it's a problem if you choose. You have to see which one is the one you lead with, which one you feel comfortable with, which ones you're absolute crap at. It's just like types, really. But I like the word style. So it's now I've got somebody else on the screen. Oh dear, oh dear.
You're okay.
Anyway,
You're okay.
Yeah. Please, nobody should talk because it just attracts the camera and then it's very difficult. So it's humorous. It's also a bit based on types. You don't have to choose, but I am interested in what people are good at. Are you good at being a hero or a sibling or an ostrich or good enough? Or are you really rather poor at any of those? Because the one you're bad at is the one you have to think about, just as with types. So that's my answer to where it all comes from. Okay. And I think style is really important. People think that style is a superficial word, like it's about fashion, it's about everyday culture. But we now know, we Jungians, post-Jungians now know that depth is hidden on the surface, that how people present themselves, what they actually do when they're being political, when they're being a citizen, this is really important.
Okay, so you just answered all 3 of my follow-up questions. You hit that one out of the park. Okay, so, and it's interesting that you say that, you created these 4 political styles a little bit, I think you use the term humorously. So you're doing that with an understanding that no one fits into any one category and that the political style, each of us, is there a style we should be striving for? Like if I were to ask you, Andrew, is there one I should be striving for? What would you answer?
No, the answer is definitely not. Listen, we're faced with so many political problematics at the moment. COVID-19, Black Lives Matter, the climate crisis, and the appalling national and international economic inequality. I would think that each of us has a somewhat different response to each of those 4 things that I mentioned. You might be a hero in relation to Black Lives Matter, and you go on the streets and demonstrate as the young people, white and black, of this country and the United States did. But you may want to be more collaborative, to be more of a sibling citizen with other people when it comes to the virus and how you're going to deal with that. So I think it's a very flexible way of thinking. What I'm trying to do is get the people who are with us, Loralee, this afternoon in England, to think about it. What kind of a citizen are you? It's not a question that is often posed. It's not a question that is really ever posed in therapy and analysis. We know about psychological types, but that's terribly general. This is about how you do your politics today. And once you become aware of how you do your politics, you can start to look at other people and see how they do their politics, and a different kind of conversation about political ideation can begin.
Well, I love the song that you sang. So for those of you who might be joining us late, you missed Andrew Samuel's song minus the dance, but you want to come on time for these because that was worth the price of admission. And Andrew, what I hear you saying, and we're going to get to the next question, is almost having the ability to fluidly move between these different styles depending on the scenario.
Well, in a way, this whole thing, if we do get serious, is about political individuation. It's not about political positions, who you vote for, your ideas and your ideology. Look, those things are probably more important than what I'm talking about now. But I think it's an incomplete picture to stay only with the ideas. It's how people do it that I'm interested in. Let me give you an example of a hero. I'm thinking of Jan Palach. In 1968, in Prague, in Czechoslovakia, the Russian tanks have rolled in and destroyed Alexander Dubček's Prague Spring. Palach was so upset that he poured petrol, gasoline, over himself and set himself alight. That's a hero. A martyr, true, but also a hero. And I think that there are people, especially in relation to the four things I mentioned, which are COVID, Black Lives Matter, climate change, and economic inequality. There are heroes. There really are. And many people here who I recognize will know that I've been writing about the rationality of political violence for 20 years. And what we're seeing on the streets of some Western countries, including the United States, is rational, if you look at it deeply, and it is heroic. It's also somewhat sibling because people are supporting one another.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so, I mean, that example that you bring up often is just, it's both a horrific one, and you used it when we first talked as an example of hope, which really challenged the paradigm of hope. So I want to go a little bit more deeply into this. I mean, given, and you know, what you're talking about takes, I love the term you just threw out there, and I don't know that I've read it before, political individuation, if there is such a thing. That's a huge word that you know, we probably don't have time to unpack. But just sitting with that, is that possible? So the next piece of this, given the extreme political polarization, both here in the US and around the world, you write that you're worried that we run the risk that the individual dimension of politics might be lost. What do you see as the mandates for ensuring that we retain this individual dimension of the political?
Well, academics and therapists. By the way, Loralee, I have no idea what I'm looking like. Is the screen angle correctly? It's just not. It's not showing me at all.
Well, you need to put it on speaker view on your screen if you can do that. Up in the top right corner, click speaker view, and then I think you'll be able to see what we're seeing.
Yes.
Because we have you. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, that's much better. I think I've forgotten the question actually.
So let me give you this question one more time. All right. So we're talking about you writing that you're worried that we're running the risk that the individual dimension of
Oh, yes.
politics
Yeah,
might get
no,
lost.
I've got it.
What are the mandates, Andrew? What are the mandates for making sure that doesn't happen?
Okay. Intellectuals, academics, therapists, analysts have become obsessed with context, a person's background, as if the only way they are expressing themselves and speaking is collective, so that people get reduced to ciphers, to members of a mass. And I do that. I mean, I've made a whole reputation and lots of books in trying to get therapists to think that way. Now I'm coming back on the other side of the street. It's partly being a Jungian, but it's also partly what I'm experiencing in my therapy work in the consulting room, which is that this isn't enough, this intellectual approach that understands why somebody has these views because of their history, whether it's slavery, whether it's Holocaust, whether it's class. That's important, and I repeat, it may be more important than what I'm talking about. But what I'm trying to get over is that each of you listening to me is doing it your own way. You may choose to join with other people, or you may not, but you're doing it your own way. And I think this is a novel dimension. We should never forget context. We should never forget background. We should never forget people's collective histories. I would never do that. But there is something else, something a little more fluid, a little more flippant, a little more slippery about individuals involved in politics.
Well, I think you bring up a great point because I think we saw that play out in the last election here in the US, where there was resistance to this idea that if you aligned with a particular ideology, whether that's feminism, whether it's a political party, you were then subscribed and proscribed to a specific way of engaging. And what you're saying liberates political engagement from the collective ideologies, even the ones that we may say we're aligned with.
Yeah, you see, I learned this in the Middle East, if I can anticipate what we might be talking about. I got a grant to go to Jerusalem in the 1990s, and there was an institute there, Social Science Institute, and they asked me to set up some kind of communication / reconciliation project between what we used to call then Israeli Arabs and Jewish Israelis. And I set it up, and all the usual kinds of discussions took place. Suddenly, I had one of those flashes. I thought, there's another way to divide these people. Some of them on either side are very rational. Some of them on either side are very brave, very courageous, very definite, very emotional, very passionate. Some of them want to know about the history, others are not so interested. So I began to see that political style crossed political differences of opinion. And that's what got me going on what I'm talking about now.
Yeah. I mean, when you talk about that, do you see a correlation between Jung's typologies and your model of political styles? Do they?
Oh, I would do anything to avoid a correlation between Jung's types and my styles.
Of course you would.
And you shouldn't really trust me when I say that. Of course, the inspiration came from the musical, from the song, and all the thinking that I associate with that, and of course, psychological types. When I give the Posh lecture on this, I bring up a PowerPoint of the first edition, 1921, from Russia, of Jung's psychological types. And I can't deny it. Nevertheless, the bit that I'm adding is that in a political culture where understandably and correctly we focus on differences of opinion, differences of ideology, differences of grasp of facts and history, we might want to look at the way in which people talk, in which people write, in which people conduct themselves. And that's what political style is all about. And these four, and we've really only talked about heroes, we need to get into.
We're gonna get into it. We're gonna get
yeah,
into it.
Okay, you get me into it.
All right. So, I mean, you just talked a little bit about the heroic citizen. All right. Let me throw this to you. Is rebellion against the status quo considered heroic, or is there more to it than that? You talk a lot about rebellion. You know, we've quoted Camus in previous conversations. When we're talking about heroic citizen, is there more to it than rebellion?
Well, actually, I've gone really right round in a circle, having written far too much about the anti-hero, about the problems of the heroic leader and of the heroic citizen. As I say, I'm coming back the other way. I think courage, which is part of hero, is really important. Winston Churchill, not a very popular figure in Britain right now, given what we've discovered about his profoundly racist beliefs and writings, he said that courage is the virtue that guarantees all the other virtues. And for those of you who want to Google, have a look what Maya Angelou says about courage and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. It's about courage and it's about risk-taking. And this is where youth comes in. I mean, I'm looking at the faces here. I can see about 35 faces. Bloody hell, we're so old. This is a very old group of people. And this is true of psychoanalysis.
Thank you for that, Andrew.
And it's true of Jungian analysis as well. But what we're seeing now, whether it's Extinction Rebellion or previously Occupy and Anonymous, the anarchist group, the kids are leading. However, this is a point I made the other day, and some people will have heard me say it. In a way, what we're seeing is a new old thing. I was in California in '67, the long hot summer, and '68, which doesn't need any kind of glossing. In a way, it's happening again. Now, that's a lovely thing to see it as a new, old phenomenon, but it's a really worrying thing because, of course, those extraordinary days maybe didn't deliver the goods to the extent that we all hoped that they would. But it isn't lost yet, and I think that the kids are out there. I know my children went on demonstrations in London. I was terrified they're going to get infected. Mm-hmm. But a lot of kids all over the world have done it, and I take my hat off to them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right. So yeah, I mean, and you know, there are others out there. Rick Tarnas's work speaks to this, how this particular epoch that we're in is so similar to what you were just referring to in the 60s. So let's move on from the heroic citizen to what you term the sibling citizen, that you write is characterized by collaboration, cooperation, and an absence of hierarchy. Can you give us some examples of where this has been historically evident, this idea of sibling citizen?
Yes, certain aspects of feminism in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, and the HIV/AIDS activist movement. Obviously, it's very difficult to operate non-hierarchically because of the way we're conditioned to look for leaders, to look for sort of a pecking order or a league table or a ladder or something like that. Another example, I think, that was really quite a sibling phenomenon in politics was the Black Panthers, who, of course, were a social movement as well as anything else. These are examples of sibling politics. Now, I want to stress the point again, because it is a model and it's also a joke, a game, something like you can be a hero and you can be a sibling at the same time. Or you might be terrifically good at being a hero when it comes to politics, whether it's national or international or even office politics or politics of the profession or whatever, but you're not very good at working collaboratively. And there are some people who I really have to say are deficient when it comes to heroism. They only want to make sure that they're moving along with everybody else. There's no real disagreements and so on and so forth. I'll give you an example of some work I've done in relation to this is in Britain's National Health Service, where heroes, I don't mean now frontline medical heroes, who, by the way, did not like being called heroes because they were doing what they had decided to do for their vocation. But I'm not talking about them. I've been working for a long time at the King's Fund, working with senior managers and directors of the National Health Service. And it is very, very difficult to be a heroic person in the NHS. It thinks sibling. Why I bring this up is that collaborative work, which most therapists like, isn't only good, it has some serious problems. And sometimes, by the way, it's tremendously ineffective. But that's siblings. What I'm hoping, Loralee, is that people with us now are kind of thinking how this applies to them in relation to COVID, climate, BLM, and economic inequality. I hope you're doing it because this is intended to be somewhat experiential.
So let me ask you this one more question while we're on the sibling citizen before we move to the next type in your model. Is sibling citizen related at all? And this is going to, try not to trigger any archetypal seizures, but is sibling citizen related at all to identity politics?
Oh, some groups of sibling citizens are connected to identity politics and others are not. I learned most about sibling citizens, frankly, from feminism. And if I were doing the illustrated version of this, and this is something that British people watching will remember, I use a very famous stock photo of the women who surrounded the Greenham Common US nuclear air base with a large knitted muffler or scarf. And there's this wonderful picture of the police pushing them forward and the women pushing back against the police. And is this identity politics? Yeah, it's also what I'm calling sibling politics. There are people who have never, ever experienced the thrill and the impact of sibling politics, of doing something in the political world with other people. But there are people who have never struck out on their own politically, but they wait to make sure that they're not the tall poppy, that they're not the odd person out, that they are safe to be who they are. So it cuts both ways.
Well, and I'm thinking
we need to move on, because it's almost
we're moving. And I'm thinking also in terms of sibling citizenship, all the images we're seeing as a result here of Black Lives Matter around the world, of people arm in arm. All right, absolutely. Let's go to ostrich. Writing about the ostrich as a political style, you suggest that perhaps the problem is not for the ostrich, is not political apathy, but too much passion. Too many aspirations. What's your advice to people struggling with political burnout? I've heard the term political exhaustion, where there's just too many crises. It seems that it creates overwhelm.
Well, there's 2 points there. One of them I'm really interested in. I am interested in people who are not interested in politics. I do a lot of workshops in which people say, well, I'm not really that interested in politics. Those are the ones I will sit at the feet of. Ostriches have a lot to offer. The problems of bystanding, they're written about ad nauseam. But what about the benefits of bystanding, of reflecting? They also serve who only stand and wait. It can be a problem. But on the other hand, because I'm trying to sort of balance this, if being an ostrich means that you eschew, you avoid action because you are up to your neck or down to your neck in reflection, then there's an issue to think about. Hamlet, thus conscience does make cowards of us all, and thus The native hue of resolution is sicklied o'er with the pale cast of thought, and enterprises of great pith and moment with this regard their currents turn awry and lose the name of action, and lose the name of action. That's the problem with too much deep reflection. And those of you who've heard me talk before will know that I think it is a besetting sin of analytical psychology. Everybody wants to be deep. Everybody wants to be balanced, and they lose the name of action.
Okay, so in the same response, you're saying you're going to sit at the feet of those people at the same time you're saying, and I hear what you're saying, especially I think in the analytical world, we want to analyze, analyze, analyze. When do we do it? How do you discern between a healing regression and an abdication of political responsibility?
Well, it's all in the point of view of the observer. One person's political indifference is another person's deep reflection. I think it just really does depend. The point about including the ostrich is to get away from a simple binary of people who act and people who don't. The ostrich can go either way. However, mostly in the world in which many of us here on the screen are in, the ostrich tends to a self-congratulatory, onanistic, deep reflection, which sees all points of view, avoids engagement, commitment, and passion. It's not just Jungian, psychoanalysts can do this too.
Okay. So you write and speak passionately about the good enough citizen as a political style that you've developed from Winnicott's idea of the good enough parent. Can you describe, and one of the key pieces in that is, you know, our relationship to failure. Can you describe how a more generative relationship to failure is necessary for this good enough political style?
I mean, Winnicott said that the baby comes to terms with the failures of the parents to perfectly fit with their needs. So failure is at the heart of good enough, management of failure. Now, I work with political activists. I am a political activist. Mm-hmm. I mean, I have a slogan, which I imagine will be on my gravestone. He wasn't a good loser, but he sure as hell was an experienced one. And I think this is at the heart of political struggle, actually, is the citizen accepting their failures. Now, I've written far more about good enough leaders and have sold the idea to senior politicians in Britain, America, and Brazil. But I'm interested in citizens who forgive themselves for their failures. So you try, and you fail, and you try again. And I'm not going to bloody well quote Samuel Beckett because I'm sick of people quoting Samuel Beckett. Although this is a moment to remember the death of my dear friend and colleague Deirdre Bair, who wrote a wonderful, wonderful biography of Samuel Beckett and the very best biography of Carl Gustav Jung as well. So there's many things to say about failure. Rumi said, failure is the key to the door of the kingdom of heaven. And T.S. Eliot said, every attempt is a wholly new start and a different kind of failure. And in British politics, there is a slogan that goes the rounds, all political careers end in failure. It doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. In a sense, what's important, and I'm sorry to use this Salvation Army language, is to fight the good fight. And if you fail, you fail. Managing failure, coping with disappointment, and knowing that you can cope with disappointment gives you a lever on political action. Because you know that when you do not achieve what you want, it will not wipe you out and destroy you. This is what good enough citizenship is about. I could say a lot more about it, but I think, you know, there will be questions and we should really move on.
Okay, well, we're on to our last question for you and I, so we've got plenty of time. So in conclusion, you've written what the first time I read it, I was taken aback by it and wanted to argue with you about it. And now I'm coming around, I think, to understanding what you're meaning. You write this: politics is a supremely expressive act akin to artistic creativity. So, Andrew, help us understand how you've integrated these two seemingly antipathetic disciplines, political engagement and artistic creativity. How do those two worlds meld for you?
Well, we can take our time to really get into this because, as you surmised, I didn't realize how central that sentence and the paragraph that it's embedded in is to this whole idea of political style. Don't forget,
Yeah.
this is about political style, how you do politics, that it ain't only what you do, it's the way that you do it. It ain't only what you say, it's the way that you say it. I've noticed that when people talk about politics, and I'm not referring only to highly sophisticated, psychologically minded people, it comes from inside as well as from outside. It is about who they are. You mentioned political individuation. I use other phrases: political development, political self, political psyche, and phrases like this. Now, what I am interested in is how people not only create their own approach to politics, because people do, but in how engagement in politics is like painting a picture, writing a poem, and so on. It isn't only materialistic. And I think that there is a problem with left-wing politics here, in which style is relegated to the background, to the less important room or box, and everything is about policy. But I do think that this is wrong, and that there is a question of style. It's no accident that so many artists are speaking out politically right now. And I don't just mean high art, which is an awful term, actually. Once you talk about high art, you're immediately talking about low art. But anyway, I mean, whether it's rappers, whether it's ballet dancers, which we may or may not be able to watch, it is a moment in which art as an institution, as an entity, is engaging with politics. And I think there is something to learn from this. If people who spend their whole lives expressing themselves are finding themselves drawn to politics at this time, isn't it possible to say that the political moment, the political act, the political thing is also about imagination, about creativity? It isn't only about the bottom line. However, to kind of say what I've been saying all the time, if you hear me saying that the bottom line doesn't matter or that policies don't matter, then I failed. What I'm trying to do is to bring in another way to look at how you are as a citizen, how you express your imagination, your creativity, your soul longings in the political arena. I'm not trying to debase intellectual activity, policy making. The other week, I was giving a long lecture on why we have to increase inheritance taxes, what Americans call death taxes. Is absolutely central in relation to economic injustice and inequality. And I'm not going to go off on a big rant about that, but I'm just trying to demonstrate I am interested in policy, but I am also interested in the political imagination and in how creativity sits at the heart of what citizens do when they do politics.
Well, I think this is a fascinating point, and I think it's central to what you're saying with this. And I think, in that sense, art's always political. When you look back in the '60s, Alvin Ailey's put revelations on stage 3 days ahead of the Woolworth's Diner incident. When you go farther back, Martha Graham started interpreting Greek mythology from a feminist perspective at the forefront of the feminist movement. I think there is this sense that I think if you're following and leaning into the creative, in particular, as Jung and Neumann define it, the creative unconscious, you're going to be out in front of the political current to some degree.
Yes, yes, but I understand what you're saying and I agree, but I flipped it the other way. This isn't about artists being political, although I brought that in.
Mm-hmm.
It's about citizens involved in politics being artistic.
Right. But that's
artistic, not autistic.
But that's my point. That if citizens as artists become creative and lean into that, it's going to give them a very individual approach to their political expression. That is not just following the crowd, so to speak.
Yes, you're beginning with the phenomenon of the political artist, and some people would say that all artists are to some extent.
No, I'm not. Martha Graham was not a political artist. Alvin Ailey was not a political artist. They were simply artists, and art in and of itself put out there will have a political.
You're right. I didn't understand.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't. So thank you for keeping on at me. I can make use of what you said, though, precisely because I didn't understand it.
Mm-hmm.
I think that when we look at today's citizens engaged in today's politics, they do not see themselves as artists.
Yeah.
Just as Martha Graham didn't see herself as a politician,
Mm-hmm.
today's citizen doesn't see herself as an artist. And I'm encouraging, if insofar as a Zoom thing like this can go there, I'm encouraging people to look at political behavior, political acts, commitments, whether it's done heroically, whether it's done with other people in the sibling mode, whether it's in the ostrich vein, or whether it's good enough with the embrace of failure. All of these things I see not only as styles, but as artistic styles, tropes, fashions even.
I think it's a beautiful way to look at political engagement. I mean, it's really innovative. Heschel said, live your life as a work of art. What does that mean? So look, we've got about almost not quite 20 minutes and we want to open this up. So Andrew, thank you. For those of you who may not know some of this work, Andrew, where can people find, if they don't know, where can they read some of this material if they want to look further at it?
Nowhere.
Andrew, you don't have it. All right, so it's not even articulated yet. It's not in A New Therapy for Politics? I don't think it is. Not really. Okay, so that your next book.
No, I started thinking about this, as I say, back in the 90s, when I realized that disagreements masked something else.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw people who couldn't agree doing their disagreements in a way that resembled the other person. Mm-hmm. That's when it really started. No, I haven't written this up. Also, it's experiential. I will have completely failed today if I hadn't got people thinking about themselves as a citizen, as an individual. And I want to say again, this is not because I am a triumphalist, liberal individualist or anything like that. I'm the opposite. I'm deeply into context, into class, into collectivity, into community. All these things are really important. But there's something about the solo individual and how they express themselves creatively when they engage in politics and even when they don't. Let's open it up. I don't quite know how we do that.
Well, let's open it up. I'm looking at the chat bar. So if you would like to type in on the chat bar, we can start with this question from Tara Bliss. She writes this: can you contextualize how to address political style and how we activate altruism within each style?
Well, I think that's a very interesting idea. I can imagine altruism being performed differently by a hero who will be doing it in terms of saving somebody else, or by a sibling who will be saying, if all of us do this together, the result will be benevolent and beneficent to a large number of people. an ostrich in the worst possible sense might say altruism, schmaltruism, who gives a shit? And the good enough citizen is saying, well, I'll do my best. And I won't give up or feel I'm a complete crap out or useless if my attempt to be altruistic fails. So I think it's a very, very interesting idea. And you could take any other human theme and play it across hero, sibling, ostrich, good enough. And that is from Jung.
Yeah.
You see,
Yeah.
there's a neutrality in what I'm saying. I mean, these images are pregnant with metaphorical associations.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's both the strength and the weakness. Jung's typology is Germanically neutral, with its rational and its irrational and its functions and its auxiliaries and all the stuff that I don't really know as much as I should know. So I think it was a great question. What's the next one?
Well, here's one from Jillian Proctor. How does it help to understand political styles? Does it help us to communicate better politically depending on what someone's style is?
Hi, Jillian. Hi, Jill. Well, my answer is that from my experience in the National Health Service, where there are all kinds of deep conflicts, learning that the way people talk and express themselves about an organizational difficulty is very helpful in reaching a better understanding and moving ahead towards some kind of resolution of a very difficult problem. Especially team leaders, they really need, when they're looking at their teams falling out, to think, actually, these people are not only falling out because they disagree, they're also falling out because they disagree in such different ways from one another. Yes, I think it is about political communication, but I don't really have a goal for this, Jill. I mean, I'm not saying if everybody understood the Samuel's model of political styles, that peace and harmony would break out. It's just a tiny contribution to thinking a little more about the role of the individual in politics. Now, this is the academic bit. I think that we have completely lost the knack of theorizing individuality because we have invested our brain power in theorizing collectivity. And I would like to rectify that. There is a paper on this, Jill, which I could send to you, which is about the role of the individual in Jung and in Albert Camus. And I'd be very happy to do that. What next, Loralee?
Well, I'm looking at, hold on. And so for those of you who want to get on the boards, if you can type something on the chat bar, that's what Andrew and I are working off of right now. Let's see, Tara Bliss, do you feel like this way of looking at political styles echoes Bion's group work functions and identity?
Oh my goodness. No, I don't think Bion is really relevant here. Oh yes, actually, you know, when you have to bear with me when I say no, I in the end mean yes. I do think that these styles are a very nascent formulation about sort of political basic assumptions, and it's not the first one. I mean, there's been stuff on the authoritarian personality, and there has been a great deal of academic political psychology on what motivates people electorally and in terms of the opinions that they hold. It's in a social science vein. So I'm not going to recite Bion's basic assumptions for groups, although I know them, I grew up on that stuff. But I do think you could see these as a fragile, playful attempt to think of some basic assumptions about how individuals do politics. But, sorry to be a bore, but I don't want to be misheard. Probably your social class is more important than which of these 4 tags speaks loudest to you. Probably your ethnicity is more important than what I'm saying. Nevertheless, sometimes at the fringes, at the playful, ludic fringes of discourse, some interesting things come up. And by the way, I did try the other day, looking at an issue of a journal, to see whether these four models could actually be used in relation to how people wrote in the professional sense. And it semi-worked, actually. I think it's just a way of thinking.
Okay. Next. Do you see Elspeth? Yeah.
Yeah, we like Elspeth because she likes us. Love the way you two work at getting to the place, not assuming that you have got there and moving past
okay, but
it.
further down from Elspeth, Andra, she says, do you think that circumstances witnessed can impel someone to a different political style? Thinking of women's peace movement in Northern Ireland, as well as those in Black Lives Matter.
That's a bringent question, and it's something I deliberately have not engaged with today. Can one reintegrate the contextual, the collective, the social with this individual perspective I'm pushing, or would it damage it? You see, if somebody says, well, my approach to political problem X, let's call it Black Lives Matter, is essentially a sibling approach. If I then say to this person, why? Where does it come from? What experiences politicized you in a sibling manner? I think I might be losing something. I might be spoiling something. But it really is worth thinking about, because of course the individual and the collective cannot be split. I'm splitting it in order to rectify an imbalance, which is being rectified. I'm not the only one. There are plenty of psychoanalysts who are thinking we've been too individual, let's be more collective and social. And I, in my tricksterish way, am saying we've become far too collective, social, intellectually aware of intersectionalities and other interstices of our lives. What about the beating heart of a single person? Is it still possible to do a political talk with that in mind, or do you have to be a poet?
Well, and then I want to interject a little statement you make in your book where you write this sentence: Jung's ideas on the individual are aristocratic, elitist, and supercilious.
Yes, and I've said several times, I am revising my approach. I'm not saying I'm that well known or that famous, but insofar as people know me, I'm the Jungian who writes that kind of stuff. So what Jung says about individuals is deeply problematic. And in the paper I mentioned, the one on Camus and Jung and the individual, what I try to do is to look what a revised model of an individual might be like. Jung's idea of the individual is very much about integration. It's about awareness. It's about individuation and so on and so forth. My idea was much shabbier.
You're talking about the good enough individual, right? Aren't you back along that theme?
Not well, I hadn't thought of it, but maybe. But the thing, I have in my mind at the moment is that if a person is facing the fractured world in which they live, they have to do it as a fractured person.
Yeah.
And for Jung's individual, capital I, in fact, capital letters the whole word, the individual, he or she does not admit to their own fracture when confronting fracture. They know. Jung's individual is the one who is supposed to know. My individual, which is far less developed than Jung's individual, is a mess.
Okay, so I want to get to this.
Yes, but you see, good politics can be done by people whose lives are a mess.
Yeah, the good enough individual. I mean, that's a consistent theme for you. Yeah. All right, let's get to this question. Let's get to this question because I think it's a good one and people are echoing it from M.A. Burge to everyone. Can you speak to anger as a driving energy within each style?
Wow.
Great question.
Yes, just as I did with altruism. But whether I can improvise it as well as the questioner could probably do is another matter, because I hadn't really thought about this. Heroes do anger, obviously. Siblings do anger in a very different way from heroes, because they need to find common ground. Because if they're going to sacrifice themselves, if they're going to take the risks as part of a group, they'd better know what's involved. Ostriches don't do anger at all, broadly speaking. The good enough citizen does anger when she or he knows it's the best thing to do and it feels right to do it, and takes the chance that it might go off very badly. So you can take almost any political emotion and run it across these styles. But again, I want to minimize. I don't want to be seen as over-claiming. You can use psychological types like that. The trouble is, if you use psychological types, you have to push the politics in to apply a very abstract model. And what I'm doing is using, as I say, affect-laden, image-heavy, metaphorically active tags, rather than the neutral language of what was 19th century German empirical psychology.
Mm-hmm.
Which is more important, Jung's types or my styles? No question, Jung's types. Nevertheless, why do we have to stay still?
Mm-hmm.
You can play with this stuff, and I think it's got mileage. How are we doing?
Yeah, we're doing great. We've got about 4 minutes left. So here's a question for you from, I'm not sure how to pronounce your first name, so my apologies. Bente Grind. What would you say about people who are too disgusted with the status quo to want to engage its toxic style?
Well, if somebody doesn't want to engage, then the particular tag or style that comes up is ostrich. They may be caught up in very high ideals. If a person finds politics disgusting, then they have a problem, because it is. And if an ostrich type of person says, I'm simply going to avoid things because it's not pure enough for me, then they will be left stranded. Absolutely stranded. Politics is dirty, shitty stuff. In all the other things we've been doing, Loralee, I've been saying, if there is to be no return to normality, no business as usual after the virus and now after Black Lives Matter, there will be violence. I don't like violence. I'm not a Gandhian, though. Mm-hmm. And I've been studying the later speeches of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and the earlier speeches of Nelson Mandela, and quite a fair bit of the writings of Hannah Arendt. Political violence is rational. Mm-hmm. I would like, because he got left out last time, my friend Robert Downes, who is the chair of the Relational School in London. Joyful militancy, building thriving resistance in toxic times. Carla Bergman and Nick Montgomery. I actually don't fully understand the question, Robert, but I think the idea of joy in relation to militancy speaks to what I'm on about. I'm trying to find a way of addressing what is terribly heavy in a joyful, or maybe joyous is a better word, and light way. Hence, it ain't what you do, it ain't what you say. So I think, I don't know if that's what you're talking about, and I am always admit my ignorance. I don't know who Carla Bergman and Nick Montgomery are, but I will write you later and find out.
All right. We have a couple minutes left, Andrew. Any other question on the board that you would like to address or speak to as a closing comment?
Just give me a second to read all this shit. There's so much. Bloody hell.
Jillian, just to when
No, no,
Andrew
no, it's
uses
okay.
epithets, it's all okay.
Oh, I'm immature. The whole talk is immature. You know, Jim Hillman and I once agreed that there was a fantasy of seriousness that bedeviled depth psychology. I'm not now talking about humor or jokes
Mm-hmm.
or something like that. I don't do much humor really, and the jokes that I do, they just come. I don't tell jokes. But the fantasy of seriousness is terribly undermining of itself,
Mm-hmm.
because who can be serious if all you can be is serious?
Mm-hmm.
Serious doesn't have any meaning without flippant, and
Mm-hmm.
vice versa, of course. Now, I'm supposed to be finding.
Well, there's one last question here.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Loralee.
Jillian.
As
Okay.
ever, you rescued
Michael,
me.
asked this, should I, and I think you spoke to this earlier, but I think it's a really great
Yeah.
point to end on. Should I cultivate a certain style to be more effective? And I know I think I know where you're going to go with this, although you never really go where I think you're going to. So let's see what you do with that. What style would be the best to adapt? I think you need to clarify that.
I don't think I'm that much of a nightmare, actually, but uh, I
Unpredictable,
um,
Andrew, not a nightmare, unpredictable.
should I cultivate a certain style to be more effective? What style would be the best to adapt? Now, you see, in principle, I don't like this question.
Mm-hmm.
It misses the point entirely. This is not about choosing, it's about who you are, etc. No style is better than the other styles, just as no, in psychological types, introversion's no better than extroversion, thinking's no better than feeling, sensation, they're all supposed to be the same. Okay, the question is crap, but the question is brilliant because it is how we all are. Should I cultivate a certain style to be more effective? What does that mean? It means you are recognizing, Michael, that there may be one of these four that could be upped in terms of its charge, its energetic charge. Heroes don't collaborate very well. Siblings don't step forward out of the mass. Ostriches, on the whole, tend to keep out of things. And good enough people, maybe their concern with managing failure means that they're predicting themselves to fail. So it may well be that just as in the Jungian typological system, the classical one, not Myers-Briggs, the inferior function, the one that's least developed, is the magic one. And I think that that is a way to use this. I remember Michael Fordham, who founded the Society of Analytical Psychology in London, and of course edited with others the collected works, telling me how Jung used typology in initial interviews. Lots of people back in the 50s, or before even, became Jungian analysts by taking the train to Zurich, seeing Jung and being anointed. That's how you did it. And they would have an interview with Jung that they would dine out on for the rest of their lives, in which they would tell stories about how Jung was so amazingly brilliant. He knew all about me from the word go. And Jung told Fordham how he did it. He found out by observation what a person's superior function was, what they were really good at. Say it was thinking. And then he used his model, which some of you will know is a bit esoteric, because the opposite of thinking is not sort of intuition. The opposite of thinking is feeling, because they're both rational, according to Jung. So he would put his questions or his analytical interventions in these one-off anointment interviews. He would put his questions to what his system told him the inferior function, the less developed one was. So when I hear people going on and on in the therapy world about how they're going to do everything collaboratively, you know, I'm thinking, well, what is it you don't do? What is it you can't do? Could it be that the concern with collaboration, which therapists are sort of ingrained with, masks a problem around heroism, masks a problem around showing off it, exhibitionistic approach to politics? Everybody's saying all the right things and listening very carefully to one another. Terrific. But is there a problem with it? So my hope is that as people click off, they will think what they're bad at. And that's, Michael, your question has got me to end on that point. Not what you're good at or what you'd like to be or what you approve of, but when you look in the mirror, which of hero, sibling, ostrich, or good enough are you bad at?
So lean into the resistance, which is something that is very artistic and creative, as artists know. Lean into the resistance in terms of these political types, Andrew.
Can I just say, because I'm really pleased, because Gillian Proctor has written, I like to focus on least developed. Yes, I know you do. And then you say, bad at being good enough. It doesn't matter whether you're right. It's an example. You've done some teaching for all of us here, just to be able to say, I'm bad at being good enough. That's what this is. That's what this is about. But before you can say I'm bad at being good enough, you have to have some sense of what the other three tags, styles might mean.
Yeah, and I want to note Salagna from, what she's saying. She's made a couple of great comments on here. You all have, so thank you for the participation about moving fluidly between the styles, understanding it as a dynamic fluidity, not a siloed categorization.
Oh, I didn't see Salagna. Hello.
Yeah.
Greetings.
Yeah.
One can also move between styles depending on context, because political context is also very fluid and dynamic. I would say yes and no, because you're right, certain political problems will produce in an individual a particular kind of stylistic response. But I think it's also likely to be the case that whatever your dominant style happens to be politically, you will apply this to every political problem that you come into contact with, and that's problematic. So if you are trying to be a hero and really fight for something, when it should be about building a movement and going into sibling politics, then there's a problem, or there could be a problem. So whilst I do see that people rotate fluidly because politics is fluid, I also see that people function rigidly because people are rigid.
Yeah. Yeah, but there is a goal to be attained to, and by doing what you're advocating, which is leaning into what we are not fluid at, what does not feel right. So look, we have to bring this to a close. I want to say thank you again, first and foremost, Andrew, to you for the innovation and the depth and the scholarship of your work and your generosity in bringing it to all of us. I'm so appreciative of that. For those of you asking, I will try to get that paper. Andrew, if you send it to me, I will try and send that paper out that you mentioned that people are looking for.
Can I put in a plug for the next one of these?
Yes.
Because the next one is
July,
very weird.
July 25th, Saturday, July 25th.
Yes, it's called New Models of Relationship and Sexuality, Viral Intimacy in the West, because I think that the virus is making us think about relationships in an interesting way, and I'm going to expand that to include Black Lives Matter as well, because I think there's something to be said about how personal relationships are changing as we are exposed to these kinds of phenomena. Sorry to crash in on that, but I think to me, it's very exciting, and I can say that I hadn't written it. So
this is groundbreaking original material that's not been written down.
It's laziness and chaos.
Well, at least we didn't have the four horsemen show up this week. You never really know with these sessions. So Andrew, thank you again. For all of it. And thank you to just the wonderful group of all of you joining us on a Saturday morning. I will leave us with this quote, which Andrew, you may call me out on later, but it's from Jung. He says, there is no cure and no improving of the world that does not begin with the individual. And I will also, along with Andrew's paper, send you the link for the piece of art that you did not get to see, which deals exactly with, in a creative way, this tension between the collective and the individual. It's a beautifully inspiring piece of art. So thank you, everyone. Thank you again, Andrew. Have a wonderful weekend and wonderful Saturday. We will see you hopefully next month in July. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.